Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. This is part 2 of our special 2-part series with Valerie Jarrett. Valerie, again, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me on, Aaron. Delighted to be with you.
Oh, my pleasure. So, we talked so much about your history in part 1. One of the things that you did, of course, with Mayor Washington, you were very involved in, shall we say, citizen engagement.
Yes.
And I loved your discussion of kind of the fact that people in Chicago, if they didn't get a problem solved, they would come to City Hall. And you had some wonderful stories of people you helped. When you were in the White House, you had kind of a similar position, but on a national scale. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, the experience I had in City Hall prepared me in so many ways for the White House, because a big part of my responsibility, President Obama wanted to make sure that his decisions were informed by the American people. We were there in service of them. And when I worked in local government, you learned that public service is 24/7. You couldn't go to the grocery store or the dry cleaners. I couldn't take my daughter to the park. People came up to me all the time, and that's as it should be. And it teaches you, because the people are proximate, to listen and to realize that you are there for them. You're not imposing your will. You're there to hear what they want and to help, in that case, improve their neighborhoods or deliver services to them, solve their problems. And so in the White House, the Office of Public Engagement and the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, those were the gateways through which state and local elected officials, county officials, and the American people interfaced with us. And so I'd never wanted to be distant from those folks, and having them come to the White House, traveling around the country and listening to their stories really it helped us make sure that we were in their service.
Well, and I mean, you said that very modestly. I mean, your contact was with every mayor in the country, every governor.
All the mayors and governors, and I love that. Everybody elected who wasn't in Congress.
Right.
And they were proximate too, which is why their input was so valuable to us.
When you look back on the Obama administration, and I mean, if we had time, I'd really like to talk about the election as well. And I mean, you have some great stories of all the ups and downs. And in fact, I think one of the great aspects of the book is just how, when you look at how well, he wasn't the president, but how Senator Obama made that decision. Wonderful stories about. I love the story about the intervention when you all were going to convince him
not to run.
Michelle did not want
for the Senate.
Yeah, for the Senate, and I was thinking, okay, if he hadn't run for the U.S. Senate, he never would have been president. So
he had his own ideas, and we're glad he did.
And my guess is he had his own timeline too.
He did, and you know what? And the thing I learned there, Aaron, is that he said to me, "Why are you afraid? I'm willing to take the chance. I'm willing to bet on myself. What's the worst thing that'll happen? I'll lose. I certainly am not going to get the job if I don't work at it." And I thought that was a really healthy attitude that applies to far more than running for the U.S. Senate.
But it can be scary to run for office. And
It's
he
terrifying.
had already lost a congressional race.
He had just lost the congressional
It was
race.
Bobby Rush.
He lost to Bobby Rush in our congressional district, and yet he thought he could win statewide. But you know what he'd been doing? He'd been going to Southern Illinois. And you know, oftentimes Chicago politicians don't go around the state, but he was really curious about agriculture and farming, and so he had a reputation downstate. And he said, I think I can do this. I think my vision for America has been informed by them, and that they'll vote for me. So he took a chance.
Obviously an amazing story. What looking back on the administration, what do you think will be his greatest legacy?
Well, you know, it's interesting you'd ask it that way. We never really thought in terms of legacy. When you're in there, you're just working as hard as you can. I think a few things. I think number one, the fact that we kept the country, the economy from going completely into the tank, and we're able to cut the unemployment rate in half is tremendous. I mean, people forget that the banks were in a free fall, our automobile industry was in bankruptcy, millions of people were losing their jobs and their homes, and we turned that around. And then there's the Affordable Care Act. And for the life of me, I've never understood why the Republicans didn't think it was a good idea to make sure that everybody could have affordable health care and wouldn't lose their insurance.
What was their idea originally?
Well, we modeled it after what Governor Romney had done in Massachusetts, right? Exactly. And so, but suddenly when President Obama proposed it, it was a no, no, no. And they tried countless times to repeal it. And the only reason why it's the law of the land today We won twice in the Supreme Court when they tried that avenue, but now it's the American people who say, wait a minute, I have asthma. I don't want to lose my insurance or see it go skyrocketing if we lose the Affordable Care Act. I enjoy being in the exchanges and getting health insurance for a reasonable price. And so it's a lot harder to take something away from people once they have it. And so I'm hopeful if people continue to speak up, that will be a big piece of his legacy. And then finally, he comported himself in a way that I think I was certainly proud to serve in his administration. We didn't have scandals. His tone at the top was always one where I think all the American children could be proud and to look up at him, and that he was a good role model. He was a good role model as both the president and as a husband, and as a father, and I hope that people will remember that very important Obama first family.
When you look at different presidencies, a lot of times, I think when you become president, you may have an agenda, but often just the current of events sweeps you away, and your presidency often gets defined by issues and events you hadn't even anticipated. And a lot of times it seems when a president really wants to accomplish something, and I'll say he because we haven't had a woman as president yet, he regrets as his tenure ends. He realizes, oh my gosh, I only have a year left, or I only have 2 years left. And either there have been policy failures, or that part of the agenda never really got put forward, or it gets put forward at the end very quickly. Yeah. When you look back on 8 years, which sounds like a lot, but as you know, really isn't.
Goes by fast.
Yeah. What policy failures do you think you regret the most?
Well, a few. I really wish that we had gotten comprehensive immigration reform through Congress. I'm just heartbroken by what we're seeing right now, the separation of families at the border, the way these children are being treated inhumanely. And we did have, everybody from law enforcement to the faith-based communities who didn't like the separation of families, to the business community, advocates, everybody was in favor of a comprehensive solution. And again, we simply couldn't get the Republicans in Congress to have the courage to move forward. I also wish that we could have gotten sensible legislation to keep guns out of the wrong hands passed. One of the worst days that I had in the entire time was after the Sandy Hook massacre, where 20 young children and 6 adults were murdered in just seconds. And again, it demonstrated the stranglehold that organizations like the NRA have on Congress, where even though the vast majority, 90%, let's say, of the American people wanted sensible background checks, we couldn't get Congress to do it. So those are a couple of the regrets, but we tried to organize ourselves in a way where we could have our policy councils that focused on policy and an affirmative agenda at the same time as you have to react to an oil spill or whatever else comes your way. And I think President Obama every single day reminded us of how finite that 8 years would be, and that even in the end, he was like, we're going to run through the tape. We don't want to have any regrets because we didn't try hard enough. And I'm proud to say we tried hard every day and never lost sight of why we were there, and that was in service.
You use that run through the tape phrase in your book, I noticed. I thought that was a great line. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Valerie in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
The Rexall Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rexall Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. Remember, this is part 2 of our special 2-part series with Valerie Jarrett. Make sure you watch part 1. It's available now online. So I'm going to ask you just 2 quick campaign questions. What surprised you the most in 2008 during that campaign? Was there one event or something that really took you by surprise?
The New Hampshire primary. That took me by surprise. But on a more positive note, I would say I was so heartened to see people who had nothing in common come together in a campaign office or along the trail and connect. And I just met so many people. We have plenty of marriages that actually forged in the course of the campaign, but those folks, those unlikely bonds that formed where people really discovered the humanity in somebody with whom they thought they had nothing in common, but they were brought together under this campaign, and that was magic.
It was interesting to me because I got to see people on the Republican side who were supportive, and actually when Barack Obama won, were excited for the country to see him win. And I thought that just spoke well of the country. I'm not sure what I'd say right now about where we are, and we can talk about that in a minute. How about 2012? What surprised you the most there? And was that an easy campaign?
No campaigns are easy, and I think it's because of his attitude, which is he wouldn't take anything for granted whatsoever. And again, he thought it was important to demonstrate that he wanted to earn the vote of the American people. You have to get caught trying really hard. And so what was challenging about that election was that he was still the sitting president. And so you're trying to do a very difficult job while you're also out there campaigning. And so it required us to be very strategic in how we use both his time and our time.
In your book, one of the things you talk about is just the extraordinary pressure that President Obama was under constantly, and at times you were concerned about him.
Yeah, I was.
What did you do?
I didn't have to be really, but I was. Well, sometimes I would just stare at him, which he didn't like very much. I'm trying to see whether he was okay, because he has such a cool exterior. I thought, well, if it's in there, I'll discover it. But he just temperamentally, I think, was made for the job. And it's not to say that it wasn't stressful. It was, but he took his responsibility seriously. He thought, well, look, I'm going to be as prepared as I can. I'm going to read every material. There wasn't a single day when I walked into a meeting with him where I felt he was unprepared. And I think that makes a big difference. If you know you're doing your best and you know you've surrounded yourself with people in whom you have confidence, then it makes the job a little easier. But I think being an advisor and being a friend strengthened both roles. I think I was a better advisor because I knew him so well and we were longtime friends, and I think I was a better friend knowing what was going on in the course of the day.
So I'm really interested in your take on what's happening in the country today. I know that you and many others across the country were surprised when Donald Trump won in 2016. When you look at, we could spend hours contrasting the two presidencies.
So let's not.
I don't mean to do that, but what has surprised you the most about Donald Trump? Or is that too long a list, or?
Well, let me answer it this way. I think it's really important for the president to remember that it's about service, that you're there for not just the people who voted for you, but once you're elected, the campaign is over and now you're the president for the entire country. And make the country feel that you're looking out for them. And I don't feel that way. And I think so many people around the country feel as though he's not looking out for us. And that's disappointing. And I think that the tone that he is helping to contribute to in this toxic environment that we're in is very polarizing. And it's pulling us apart in a way that isn't the direction I think America should be going. But the reason why I'm still very optimistic, Aaron, is because I do travel the country and I still meet these ordinary Americans that are doing extraordinary things, that are working in their community, who believe that we are stronger when we are together, that we have more in common than one might look from the superficiality that we might observe, and that are engaged. The level of activism that we've seen since the election, I wasn't the only one who got caught by surprise, and I think the outpouring that you saw beginning the day after the inauguration with the Women's March, the young folks from Parkland who excited our country about the possibility of ending gun violence with the March for Our Lives, millions of people across the country, the Me Too movement and Time's Up, and the record number of people, women particularly, who ran for office in the midterms, people of color who were very actively engaged. The election in Alabama with Doug Jones, African-American women came out in record numbers and made that happen. And now we have more women and people of color running for president than ever before. So the activism gives me hope. And I try to put it in perspective of the long view. 1 year for my birthday, President Obama gave me a gift, and it was a copy of the Petition for Universal Suffrage signed in 1866, and the resolution approved by the Congress giving women the right to vote in 1919. 53 years. And so change doesn't happen overnight. It takes good people sacrificing mightily decade after decade after decade. Same-sex marriage was only legal in 2 states when President Obama took office. When the Supreme Court ruled 6 years later that it was constitutional, it was 37 states and the District of Columbia. Why? Because of decades of hard work. And so I think taking that long view, recognizing that this is a very painful zigzag, but that we can change the trajectory. We can make it a positive trajectory. We just have to recognize how empowered we should each feel about what our voices can do, how our voices can be a force for good.
Well, I love your optimism. And you use the term zigzag, and I'm going to make a couple of comments and love to hear your thoughts. In terms of zagging, as it were, in my lifetime, presidents, when they took over from a president in the opposing party, there usually was a lot of graciousness, and there usually was very little criticism, relatively little criticism of his predecessor. And it was, their agenda might be different, but it was their agenda. This president, in a very short period of time, attacked his predecessor, President Obama, and seemed to take on a policy approach of anything that the Obama administration did automatically was bad, even though everyone on both sides of the aisle knew that that couldn't be true. I'd be interested in your take on that phenomenon for starters, because I just don't remember ever seeing anything like that.
Well, I can tell you our experience when President Bush turned over the baton to President Obama. Not only was he gracious, invited all the former presidents to come to the Oval Office, and he and Laura Bush extended themselves to the Obamas in every possible way, but he also directed his team to support us on the transition. And I met firsthand with my predecessor, who spent hours making himself available so that we would understand everything we were walking into. And that's one of the strengths of our country, is that we have campaigns and then a seamless transition of power. And we should pride ourselves on that. And I remember after the election, even as soul-crushing as it was, President Obama said to us, remember what George Bush did, what President Bush did for us? We are going to do the exact same thing for this administration. And so, yeah, it's disappointing to see the turn that we are taking right now. But that's why, look, elections have consequences. And I say to the 43% of Americans who are unhappy with this current climate, vote. The 43% of eligible voters did not vote. And so I'm hoping that the activism that we're seeing now will translate into people really participating in the next presidential election. The President of the United States is not only the president of our country, but the leader of the free world. I just came back from Great Britain, and obviously they have their own challenges, but they're looking at us and they're really worried because of the leadership. And we can change that.
Well, one of the worries, certainly, and of course this is maybe from a more personal perspective, but the attack on institutions of our country, in particular the press, with the current president calling the press the enemy of the people. Most presidents are relatively unexcited about the press, and there's often tension between the two, which there should be. But the concept that members of the press are enemies of the country, that to me is something new.
We rely on the press and the freedom of the press, and we are fortunate to have so many good women and men who put themselves out there and in harm's way right now. Look at how they're being attacked and their families are being threatened to just get to the truth. And sometimes they don't get it right, but look, you got to work with them. And you're right, there were many times where we complained about the press, but we appreciated their job and we understood that those who came to us had the right for us to tell them the truth, and we worked really hard to get the truth right. I can remember one of our press secretaries, early on, we were trying to grapple with something that the press was inquiring about, and he said, I can't go out there unless I know I have all the facts. We're going to stay in this room until we're sure I'm right, because what I say matters. And so that's a relationship, not just the press are a conduit to the people who are there to serve. And so we have to respect them as that vessel, as that conduit. And I think it's a travesty that they're being criticized and attacked the way they are.
All right, we're going to take our last break, and we'll be back to wrap up with Valerie.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email harbertv.com.
Safely stop fires around your home. Introducing the Fire Ice XT 20-ounce aerosol canister. Fire Ice XT is an eco-friendly water-based fire suppressant gel. Unlike a traditional fire extinguisher, Fire Ice XT is a highly effective, non-toxic firefighting agent that is easy and safe to use around your home, family, and pets. Available at Amazon.com or call 800-924-4874.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. Remember, this is part 2 of our special 2-part series with Valerie Jarrett. And make sure you go to the website on the screen so you can get a copy of her book. So I'm just fascinated and a little disappointed at the current president's incredible use of Twitter to control the daily news feed, the daily news story. Why haven't Democrats responded and taken that challenge on?
Well, listen, they'd be responding 24/7, right? I mean, he's quite prolific on Twitter. And I think the question, it's just symptomatic of a bigger problem, right? And that is using communication, kind of free-flowing communication. When you're the President of the United States, you should make sure that what you're saying that will be heard all over the world is accurate and right and represents the policies that you believe in. And we don't see that happening.
So why don't more people on the Republican side who normally feel just the way you articulated, why don't they have more to say?
They're afraid.
Just totally intimidated.
They're totally intimidated. They're worried about losing their elections. They're worried about a tweet being directed at them. They don't want to put themselves in harm's way. They've seen what has happened to some of their predecessors who have dared to speak back, and I think that they're totally putting their short-term political interests ahead of what's good for our country. I don't know where those good folks are that they feel so chilled by his presidency that they no longer feel comfortable doing what they know is right. And I know enough members to know what they say in private, and I just wish they'd speak out more in public.
One of the issues that Democrats don't seem to have really taken advantage of is climate change. And in particular, when you look at the impacts on climate change, the people who are going to be most affected are going to be people of color, poor people, and I'm talking about globally, but also in the United States too. Wealthy people have the ability to build houses and communities that can withstand a lot of what is already happening and will happen. Why hasn't the party taken this on in a really significant way, do you think?
Well, President Obama did, which is why he galvanized 200 countries around the world to sign the Paris Climate Accord, which then this administration pulled out of. But what I've been heartened to see is many of the governors and mayors and business leaders have stayed in. This new administration is rolling back many of the important regulations in the Environmental Protection Agency, most recently pertaining to the coal plants. And that's going to affect everybody's life. You can't run away from the environment. And I think in the campaign, in the presidential campaign, you will see climate change being a major issue. they're quite vulnerable on this.
All right, I know I only have a couple minutes left. I want to talk to you about a subject I know you've given great thought, and that's leadership. What makes for a great leader, in your opinion?
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, you need to know the people that you're trying to lead, which means you have to listen, you have to be proximate to them, you have to let them into your life in order for you to earn their trust. So you have to be authentic, transparent. When you're wrong, you have to admit you're wrong. You have to listen and engage with people. And I think there is no leadership that isn't right, where the people that you're leading don't feel that you understand them, don't feel that you are rooting for them, that you're there to look out for them. There is an intimacy in the relationship, even if you've never met the leader. If they have inspired you, it's because they've touched not just your mind, but your heart. So I see it in business, I see it in politics, and I see people who pretend that they're leaders. But you know what? The public is quite discerning. They can tell a fake when a person is actually a fake. And so what I've said, for example, to all the presidential campaigns is just be yourself. Be comfortable, laugh at yourself, don't lose sight of your vision for America and how you want to execute on it. And I think that that's the same message I would give to people leading in business. Know your business, but know your people. Understand you're only as good as your weakest link. Surround yourself by people who share your values and who are going to have a moral compass pointing towards true north, because you will be weakened if you surround yourself by people who do not feel that way.
Who would you select or suggest as 2 or 3 great leaders, just in your opinion, at any point in history or today, in the past?
Well, obviously, I think President Obama was a great leader, a superb leader. I think that for all of the reasons that I just described, he never lost sight of why he was there. That was his direction to us, even every single day. I think on the world stage, Chancellor Merkel has been an incredible leader. I think that she, and during a very difficult time for her country as well. I think we have I think Mayor Daley was my Mayor Daley, Mayor Richard Daley.
Not my Mayor Daley.
Exactly, was a great leader in that he took over Chicago, and obviously Mayor Washington was an extraordinary leader as well. But Mayor Daley came in with people questioning whether or not he would continue the progressive agenda that Mayor Washington had begun, and he did. And it's not to say he was a perfect man, but I think that I've certainly learned an enormous amount from him. And the other thing, I completely forgot one of the other important things leaders have to do. They have to be able to absorb a fair amount of pain and not make it about themselves, not make themselves become numb or react to it too impulsively, nor let it eat away at them too badly either. Absorbing pain has a lot to do with leadership.
Well, I know we're out of time, but in terms of absorbing pain, something you got to see firsthand, one of the toughest positions, I think, maybe the toughest position to be in, is to be the spouse of a candidate or an elected official.
It's very hard, yeah.
And I mean, you certainly saw Michelle Robinson, who became Michelle Obama, go through all kinds of trying times. Anything we can do to make it easier for spouses or partners of candidates and elected officials?
Well, one mistake we made is that we did not treat her as a principal, if you will. In the beginning, she was doing great out on the campaign trail. She was the spouse. She didn't have the resources or the staff that her husband had, and that was a disservice to her, because as soon as she became good at it, she became a target. And I think we got caught a little flat-footed, not protecting her, which was deeply and profoundly disturbing to me, given how much I love her and feel like we let her down. And so I think that what the campaigns should appreciate is that the spouse is vulnerable, cares more than anybody else in the world about their spouse and how their spouse is doing out there. So pay attention to them.
All right. Valerie, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I really enjoyed this, Aaron.
You were great. All right, that was Valerie Jarrett. This is the end of part 2. Make sure you watch part 1. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.